All right, we're going to go ahead and get started on the notes on quadrilaterals. So something that we should know as previous knowledge is that all quadrilaterals have exactly 4 sides. And their interior angles always add to be 360 degrees. If you didn't know that, you can draw yourself a picture of any 4-sided figure, like this. And you can go through and you can actually cut it in half. If you cut it in half, you'll notice that you have 2 triangles there. Every triangle has 180 degrees in it. So you would be adding 180 plus 180, which would get you to 360. All right? There are 5 different types of quadrilaterals that have specific properties that must be memorized. Just so you know, there are actually 6 different types of quadrilaterals, but we'll only be learning about 5 of them. Today we'll be learning about 2. So for our first part, we need to talk about the properties of parallelograms. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to draw ourselves a parallelogram, or at least to the best that we can. Okay, let's try that again. All right. Okay, so for property number 1, we have that opposite sides are parallel. So what we're going to do is we're going to label our quadrilateral with letters so that we can talk about which sides are parallel. So I'm going to ask that you put A, B, C, and D. Now when it says opposite sides means the ones directly across from each other. So in our picture we have BC and we have AD being parallel. What we do for those is we put little triangles on there, or you can put arrows. So the way to write that is going to be BC is parallel to AD. All right, don't forget that the 2 vertical lines just mean parallel. All right, now we're going to have to label the other opposite side. So we've got AB, and AB is parallel to DC. Notice we put 2 triangles on that one, because that means that those 2 are parallel to each other, but not parallel to the other 2. So we would write down that AB is parallel to DC. Now the second part we're going to talk about is actually the size. So the size of the opposite side. So opposite sides are congruent. So what that means is that BC and AD are the same size. Now if you remember, when we're trying to say that they're the same size, you're going to go through and just put 2 little notches on it, or possibly 1 notch. So we'll start off with 1. So BC and AD. So we'll write BC is congruent to AD. And then we'll do 2 for the other set. So we'll say AB is congruent to DC. All right? Now for number 3, what we're going to talk about is actually opposite angles. So we're going to say opposite angles are congruent. What I mean by opposite angles are the ones directly across from each other. So we have angle A being congruent to angle C. And we have angle B congruent to angle D. All right? Now what we have is what's called consecutive interior angles. So consecutive angles are supplementary. If you forget what that means, supplementary just means that they add to 180. And what consecutive means is that they're directly in a row, so right next to each other. Now an example of those would be that angle A, so the measure of angle A, plus the measure of angle B equals 180. One way to note that is that you know that angle A is acute or small, and you've got angle B, which is big or obtuse. Small plus big equals 180. Another example, we chose A and B because they're on the same line. I could also choose A and D. So the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle D equals 180. Now there are many other ones that we could write down, but we don't have space. So I'm just going to put a comma and say there are more. For the other ones, we had written all of them down. So I just want to be clear that there are more options. We're just not going to write them all. Now, the last part that we have to put in our picture is going to be about our diagonals. We've talked about diagonals many times, but we seem to always forget. So the diagonals run from corner to corner. So for example, I have one from A to C. I have one from C to D. All right? So what happens here is that the diagonals bisect each other. Now, when I say bisect, the word bisect, in case you've forgotten, means to cut directly in half. Okay? So that means AC has been cut directly in half. So what we'll do is we'll mark them as being the same. So I'm going to put a letter here in the middle. We'll call it E. And then what we have is that AE is exactly the same as EC. And then we have that BE is exactly the same as ED. All right? So we'll write that down. So we have AE is congruent to EC. And then we have BE is congruent to ED. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and we'll do our example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause. So make sure that you press pause. And I'm going to fill in the answers. So what I'll do is I'll do a quick explanation afterwards. This will save us a bunch of time. All right. So I have the answers here for you. So for number 1 and number 2, I'm always going through and I'm going to be talking about the actual numbers that talk about how big a certain thing is. So, for example, when it says AD equals, it's looking for a number value. So AD matches up with BC, and that's why it's 8. And then continuing on. The only one that most people struggle with is the measure of angle A. So the thing that you have to be careful with is that A and D are consecutive. So because A and D are consecutive, you would do 180 minus 68, and that would get you 112. All right? Because angle D is acute and angle A is obtuse. Now for number 2, I went through and I filled them in. I think everybody should be okay with that. So let's go through and talk about number 3. Number 3 is probably the toughest one on the page. So what we're going to do is we're just going to label as we see them. So it says xy equals 15. So I'm going to fill that in. And the one directly opposite it is wz, and it's also 15. And then we have wx is 22. The one directly opposite is also 22. Now we're going to go through and we're going to look at the next one. It says zx is 32. So zx has been cut in half in our picture, so we need to take half of 32. So it's going to be 16 for both. And then it tells us wt is 10. Since that is the small one, I can actually go through and just write 10 in the other small one for ty. All right. Now it tells you the measure of angle wzy. So the place to focus when you're given 3 letters is always the middle letter. So Z tells you where the vertex is. That's that middle part. So WZY, I would go from W to Z to Y, which is this entire space right here. That space is 62 degrees. Which means that our X in its entirety is also 62 degrees. Now what we're going to look at is it says WXT is 27. So I'm going to pick a different color. And I'm going to go W to X to T, which is just one small part of angle X. So WXT is that top part there, and it's 27. Now to find the other part, because I know the whole angle for angle x is 62, I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to do 62 minus 27, and I'm going to get 35. And I'm going to take this and do it a different color, and 35 belongs right here. Alright? Now what you have to do is know that in the opposite corners, we're going to have them in exactly opposite spaces, because these are alternate interior angles. So I have 27 degrees up in the top part here, which means in Z, the bottom part will be 27, because they're opposites, alternate interior. Same thing goes for the 35. It's in the bottom, so it will go in the top. Alright? Now let's look at the last piece of information. It tells us ZWT is 77 degrees. So let's find it. ZWT, that's this face right here, is 77. Now there are lots of different ways to get our final angle, the one right next to 77. But I'm going to go ahead and fill in the opposite corner with 77 as well. So one thing we could do is we actually have, we can go through and see that alright, we can see that we have W and Z are consecutive angles, so we would go through and we would add them to be 180 degrees. Now notice Z is made up of two parts, 35 and 27, and W is made up of two parts, but we're missing one of the parts. So what we can do is we can actually go through and find it. So what I'll do is I'll write down that I have 35 plus 27 plus 77 plus X equals 180. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to add those. So if I go through and I add them, I would get 35 plus 27 plus 77, and that's 139, plus X equals 180. If I subtract that, I get X equals 41. That means that my final two angles will be 41. Now all we need to go through is fill them out. So it says ZW. So if I look at ZW, we wrote 15. If I look at ZY, we wrote 22. If I look at TX we wrote with 16. WY is 20 in total. We had 10 and 10. TZY, so again, look at this middle letter. So TZY is 27 degrees. And then XYZ, I'm going to need to add, because this one, let me go back and write it. This one is 41. So for this one, I need to do 41 plus 77. That gives me 118. Now I need to go through an XWT. So XWT is 41 degrees. And then XYT, you know that YXYT is 77. This is probably one of the hardest ones, but you will need to practice to make sure you understand it. Okay.